Hello, hey, hi, hey, what's up? Hello. So, before I get into this, word of warning, I am very tired and I have a little bit of a headache, and I've been tired and had a little bit of a headache for most of this week. So, if I'm more scattered than usual, that is why. But anyway, so today we're going to be doing something a little bit different and talking about some of my all-time favorite books, but not just the queer ones this time, though many of them are queer romances because, you know, it's me. Before we get into that, I did want to share some pretty awesome news that the Kickstarter for the audiobook of my queer, trans, young adult novel Dreamers officially finished yesterday, and not only did we meet our goal, we exceeded it by $285. So, yes. I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who contributed, and a shout out to our most recent contributors, Stevie, Will It Work Dansiker, Alicia Marmaros, and Mortidus Sabo, or Sabo, and as always, apologies if I'm pronouncing anyone's name wrong, which is entirely possible. But yeah, so the voice actor is already hard at work recording the book, and I am hard at work on the bonus content, particularly Jackson's story, so hopefully we will have some very awesome things to share with you over the next few months. So thank you. Okay, so with that said, let's get on with the video. So today we are talking about favorite books. Now I read a lot of books, and anyone who watched my video a while back about 40 some books I read in a month is probably aware of that. But yeah, so I really like a lot of the books that I read, and some of them I recognize as extremely well written and just really well done altogether. But the ones that I rank as my favorites are the ones where I finish reading them and just immediately want to go back to the first page and read them again. So I've definitely talked about some of my favorite books before, but in this video I thought I would talk about some of my favorites that I haven't really mentioned before. And well, one of them I definitely have, but I just felt like I had to include it because it's one that I reread so often. So but yeah, I'd love to hear about your favorite books, so definitely tell me all about that in the comments. Okay, so the first book on my list is actually not a queer book at all, but a novel I read way back in the long ago days of my early 20s and have consistently read and reread ever since. And if you've ever seen the film version, do be aware that both the movie and the book are good, but they are very different. So like the mood, the characters, the plot, very different. But yeah, so the first book on my list is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. So I have read pretty much everything Diana Wynne Jones ever wrote, mainly because her books pretty much always have that perfect blend of coziness and magic with characters I really love and root for. And Howl's Moving Castle in particular resonated with me, I think especially because it shows this kind of nervous, uptight, and shy character suddenly realizing she doesn't have to care what anybody else thinks of her after she's turned into an old woman by a witch's spell. And, you know, she goes to live with a very vain and silly wizard, his long-suffering protege, and a grouchy but lovable fire demon. And it's all very lovely. Now, the book definitely has its flaws, like the ending in particular has some leaps of logic that don't make a lot of sense on closer inspection, but overall it is a warm, cozy, fun story full of interesting characters and like found family and just a glorious, like, no fucks left to give kind of mood that I found very freeing as a young person. So also Howl is hilariously camp and such a drama queen, and Sophie is a wonderful, no-nonsense protagonist, just very good. I reread this book at least once a year, and it never disappoints. So next up on my list is a series of 2 books that I have definitely mentioned before, but which I need to include on this list because I love them too much not to. So they are, of course, the Breakaway series by E.L. Massey, particularly the first 2 books, Like Real People Do and Like You've Nothing Left to Prove. I won't babble on too much here since I've definitely done that before, but Words just cannot express how much I love these books and the two main characters, Eli and Alex. They are complex and real and suit each other so well, and they have what is probably one of the healthiest relationships I've ever encountered in fiction, or real life for that matter. I reread these books more than any others in my library, and I always leave Alex and Eli feeling a little better about myself and the world. So yeah, definitely a top spot on my favorite books list. The next book on my list is yet another non-queer book, though I'm actually in the process of fixing that with a queer reimagining of it called Heart Worth Breaking. More info on that over on my author website at tjbear.com. That book is The Blue Castle by L.M. Montgomery. So most people know this author for her Anne of Green Gables books, and those are definitely good books too, but this standalone novel just struck such a deeper chord with me, probably for similar reasons as Howl's Moving Castle. So the main character is a young woman past marrying age, which means she's like 26 or 27, and she's just being constantly put down and taken advantage of by her domineering mother and her family. So she doesn't go out, she doesn't have fun, her days are just really dreary and unremarkable, and she's kind of made peace with the fact that that's how her life is going to go. But then one day, she gets word after a doctor's visit that she has a heart condition that is likely to kill her in, I forget if it's 6 months or a year, but something like that. But regardless, she suddenly realizes that she has not actually lived her life at all. And so she starts to change that. She gets a job caring for this terminally ill girl who was once her friend. She proposes to the rakish young man everyone in town disapproves of, and then she essentially tells her family to fuck off and goes off to live with this guy in his little cabin on a nearby island. Yeah, and one of the most beautiful things about this book is the description of the island and just the quiet, cozy times the newly married couple have there. It's also another one of those books about breaking free of society's expectations and living the life that feels right to you, which obviously resonates with me on many levels. More than that though, it's a story about being brave, and since I've always wished very much that I could be braver in most aspects of my life, it's a story that I never fail to connect with. So next up is a series of books I only read recently, but which is definitely going up on my list of favorites, as evidenced by the fact that I finished reading them and then immediately started rereading them. So that series is the mid-century New York City series, We Could Be So Good and You Should Be So Lucky by Cat Sebastian. So both of these books are historical queer romances, and they're not only very well written, but also provide some pretty fascinating historical context for what queer folks were up to during the late 1950s and early 60s. So the first book focuses on this gruff, talented young news reporter and the kind-hearted but scattered son of his boss, who's recently started work as a reporter. It's one of those grumpy sunshine pairings, and it's a wonderful slow burn of a romance, since the boss's son only starts to realize he's bisexual after discovering he's developing feelings for the guy who has become his best friend. Sounds a little familiar. It's beautifully done. It manages to be hopeful and happy, despite happening at a time when queer couples, couldn't exactly be open about themselves. And I just really, really enjoyed reading it. So the sequel, which is called You Should Be So Lucky, focuses on a different couple a year or two later and has cameos from the original couple. And I only got to read it this week since I was on this massive wait list for it at the library, and my turn finally came due. So this book focuses on a guy named Mark, who is a book reviewer for the same newspaper as the characters in the first book. And he has been grieving for about a year now after the unexpected death of his partner. So it's even tougher for him because his partner, William, was a prominent lawyer with hopes of a political future. So they had to be extra careful about not letting anyone know they were together. So for Mark, he's grieving the person he loved the most in the world and, hoped to spend the rest of his life with. But to the rest of the world, he's just William's roommate. So that makes everything about 1,000 times tougher for him because, most people don't even know he is essentially a grieving widower. In any case, Mark has been retreating from the world and just kind of pushing away everything he used to enjoy, all the people in his life. But then he's assigned to do a series for the paper on this young baseball player named Eddie. And Eddie was recently traded to a New York team and is going through this massive batting slump on a team that was already really not doing great. Eddie is basically like a puppy in human form, and Mark is initially not really sure they're going to get along, but they end up striking up this really nice little friendship that blossoms into more when they discover that they're both gay, they're both attracted to each other, and they're both grieving the end of a period in their lives. This book is really good at showing the realities of grief without ever getting too dark. Like, it maintains a hopeful air the whole way through while still being very respectful and honest about what it feels like to grieve. And it's just really, really wonderful watching Eddie and Mark come together and grow as people through knowing each other. So yeah, A++. Will definitely reread a third and fourth and fifth and so on time after this. The last book I'm going to talk about is another series. So technically not a book. It's not a singular book. And while the main pairing is technically straight, the secondary couple is queer, and there are some pretty strong bi vibes from several of the supposedly straight characters. So I consider this a queer series, even though on the surface it might not appear to be one. But the book series is The Raven Cycle by Maggie Stiefvater, and the first book is called The Raven Boys. And it's very different from the other books on this list in that I don't reread it quite as often because it's much darker in mood than the others. But it is an amazing story with just a fascinating and complex paranormal plotline, ride or die friendship group, quirky witches, gorgeous writing, and some of the best characters and characterization I've seen in a book series. So I read the whole 4-book series in a few days and then immediately turned back to the first page of the first book to reread it, if that tells you anything. I won't say too much about the plot, but definitely go check it out if you want to get ridiculously invested in fictional characters for however long it takes you to finish the series and have your life ruined forever in a good way. Okay, so other books to check out, which are definitely among my favorites, but which I didn't talk about here since I've talked about them before. Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas, Date Me, Bryson Keller by Kevin Van Wy, The Charm Offensive by Alison Cochrane, The Timekeeper Trilogy by Tara Sim, Boyfriend Material and Husband Material by Alexis Hall, and of course, a little comic series called Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. So yeah, those are some of my favorites, or at least the books that I love enough to go back and reread multiple times. So how about you? Do you reread books? And which ones are your favorites and why? Have you read any of the ones I mentioned? And if so, what did you think about them? So I would love to hear your thoughts. So please feel free to sound off in the comments if you feel like doing so. And of course, as always, we welcome long comments here. So feel free to write an essay if you feel so inclined. I will read every word, I promise. Okay, well, that's gonna about do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, liking, subscribing, commenting, all the wonderful things that you do. Huge thanks as always to our patrons who are amazing, fantastic, wonderful, spectacular, and a special shout out to our Nick Nelson members, Kelly Walker, Paul Z, Kent Smither, Kim Engel, Lauren Javier, and Mark Walker. All right, have a wonderful rest of your day or night or whatever time of day it may happen to be, and I'll see you next time. Bye.